Hello YouTube, it's DasGregor for another Gentoo in review. Today we'll be looking at the Eselect command and what it can do for you, and another important thing that Gentoo does in regards to news articles. Sometimes when you do an emerge sync or a WebR sync, it'll come back and say that there are news items that you may need to read. And it's very important sometimes to look at these. I bring this up now because I noticed an article that just came out most recently that could affect some people depending on how their partitioning works. Eselect also allows you to be able to choose different versions of programs that are running and choose which version of that program you want to use. To be able to look at a selection of options for Eselect, all you need to do inside of your console is type in Eselect and hit enter. Now you can install different Eselect options with Emerge, but these are the ones that I currently have here, and it explains right here on the right side what each one does. To give an example of some that are commonly used, the OpenGL for manage the OpenGL implementation, if you're using, say for instance, the NVIDIA driver set over Xorg, then you would need to change OpenGL to set it to the NVIDIA instead of using Xorg, or vice versa if you're having problems. If you had multiple versions of Python, for instance, you can look at Python. To give that example, if we use Eselect Python list, it shows, for instance, that we have Python 2.7 and 3.2. Now, if we wanted to utilize 2.7 over 3.2, we could then do Eselect Python set and then say 1, and that would change that so that it's then using the Python 2.7 implementation over 3.2. The same thing with OpenGL, although I am using the Nouveau drivers for this version of Gentoo. If we do in a list there, we'll find that since I am only using Nouveau and I don't have NVIDIA installed, that's my only option. It's really handy though, for instance, different versions of Java that you might have, OpenGL, Python, etc. Another very useful issue for Eselect is the news. If we look at the news, for instance, Eselect news list, it's going to give us all the different news items that they have thrown out. Now normally if you have not read these would be in bold and you would know right away which ones you haven't looked at. Now the one that recently came out that I thought might be something of interest to you guys is the number 9 option, which just came out on 9/27. To be able to look at that, we would do Eselect news list 9. Oh bugger, I'm sorry. Brain fart right there. Read 9. There we go. Sorry about that. And this is quite interesting because it's saying here, Linux systems which have the root and user on separate file systems but do not use an initramfs will not be supported starting on the 1st of November of this year. If you have root and /user on separate file systems and you're not currently using an initramfs, you must set one up before this date, otherwise at some point on or after this date, upgrading packages will make your system unbootable. For more information on setting up an initramfs, see this URL. Due to many upstream changes properly supporting Linux systems that have /user missing at boot time has become increasingly difficult. Despite all our efforts, it already breaks in some exotic configurations, and this trend is likely to grow worse. For more information on the upstream changes and why using initramfs is the cleanest route forward, see the following URLs. I, for instance, don't use an IntRam FS, but it's very simple to set up and install. And what it pretty much does, from what I understand, is it sets up that initial configuration so the system knows where everything should be right at the beginning, instead of waiting to see what the FS tab says and going from there. It starts it first before the main system kind of kicks in. That's really important, however, if users out there have put their /user directory in a different location. Because if you don't read the news files, you're not going to know that that's happened, and all of a sudden, sometime after the 1st of November, you could do a portage update, emerge and fix the world, and break your system and not have a clue what just happened. It's really important to always look at your Eselect news items if it says that there's something there. Another good example of why it's important is look at number 7. If we read number 7, it's about cups. It talks about how it's taking offline the browser, and how if you want to still be able to browse for NFS type network printers and such, you need to also install the cups-browse ed file and set that up to start proper. Eselect is very handy because besides the news and being able to choose different applications, you can also set up other settings within it. If we do an emerge-s eselect, for instance, we will find that there are some other options that we can choose. For instance, eselect mode, XVMC, the widgets, VI, VDR for VDR plugins, etc. There are many different settings here that you can put. If you have multiple versions of Ruby, you can manage that with Eselect. They don't come by default just always there. Sometimes you have to think about what you're using on your system so that you can choose the Eselect. Like right here, PHP modules. Excellent command to have and use and manage those different versions. But also very good for looking at those news articles that can be very detrimental to your system if you're not paying attention. For instance, I can use the example that I am always used to putting my make.conf file inside of /etc. Recently, with rebuilding everything with Gentoo, I've found that they have moved the make.conf file from etc into etc/portage. And therefore I'm having to get into the routine of making sure that I edit etc/portage/make.conf instead of just putting it into the etc directory. There are always things that they do that for the long run are much better. At one point in time, for instance, the layman repositories that you can bring in extra repos for Gentoo, they had them all in one place at one time, and they decided to change to make things more uniform to put them in the var directory instead of, I believe, the user directory. And so if you're not paying attention to that, suddenly things aren't going to work proper because you have to set where your layman portage is within the make.conf, and if it's changed directories and you didn't pay attention to the news article, you could have missed it. Sometimes I talk about deprecated applications, like no longer needing to support Java version blah, and that the newer versions are bigger, and it's always there. Always a good place to look for it, always a good place to find things. So this one's going to be rather short. Well, you say, yeah, right, what's short? 10 minutes of blah, blah, blah? But hey, I think I'm under 10 minutes here. So hopefully I've explained Eselect and the importance of looking at the news articles and how else it can work for you. Well, this morning, evening, noon, or night, whatever you're having, enjoy it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your comments, and we will talk to y'all later. Thank you very much. Bye.